Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Design Connections Virtual. I'm Stephen Sloan, VP of Media here at INS. We appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. A few quick housekeeping notes before we jump in. The help desk is on the first floor on the bottom right if you need any technology assistance. If you have other questions, you can find one of the INS team members. We are marked with the star next to our icon. Or you can message Taylor or myself in the chat section, and we will help you out. For those of you wanting CEU credit through IDCEC or AIA, for this morning's presentation, we will provide submission instructions in a follow-up email right after this event. Our goal at Design Connections, whether we're virtual or in person, is to offer guidance on where our industry and collective work are headed. And today's presentation and conversation will work towards that goal. Remember, I say this at every event we have. This is not a spectator sport. We encourage you to ask the questions that are keeping you up at night. Share with the group the solutions you've discovered through the last year and a half. As a media brand, we don't profess to have all the answers. We want to hear from you. So this is a panel discussion with lots of Q&A, so ask those questions. Before we jump into our panel, I'd like to let everybody know that we will be going back to in-person events this fall. Design Connections will be in Huntington Beach, September 7th and 8th, right after Labor Day, at the beautiful Paseo Hotel. We're very excited about that. More details and the first invitations are being sent this week, actually, Wednesday. So look for that. I'd now like to introduce my very charming and handsome sidekick, Robert Nieminen, our Chief Content Director, who will kick things off and get us started with our panel. Join me if you're Rob.
Thank you, Stephen. Always nice to get such a warm and flattering introduction. You're too kind, but welcome everyone to Design Connections Virtual from me as well. We're so glad you're here and appreciate you spending part of your day with us. As Stephen mentioned, we have a great panel lined up for you this morning that will be just starting in a couple of minutes. And our one-to-one meetings, I think, will be equally exciting, I'm sure, as our amazing sponsors have some new things to share with you all that I think you'll appreciate. And so just briefly in thinking about, what topic or theme we want to discuss for today's event, we realized that a lot has changed in the past 18 months, obviously, which is why we're still meeting virtually rather than in person. And thankfully, that's already starting to change as live events are starting to make a comeback. And obviously, the pandemic has shifted priorities and created a new sets of challenges to the way we work and live and learn and heal and play. So, obviously, everything has changed so much. And with so many uncertainties, we wanted to explore some of the things that won't change, at least not in the near term. So for our conversation today, we're going to be taking the long view and explore some of the longer term design trends and how the pandemic will change the way that we'll be designing in the years ahead. Before I introduce our panelists, I have one quick housekeeping item to go over. We do encourage your participation, as Stephen said, and we want to hear from you. So if you have a question for our panel, just use the Q&A chat feature in the menu bar at the bottom of your screen. You can submit a question at any time, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible during the Q&A session towards the end of the discussion. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today, and I'm going to go ahead and invite them onto the stage at this time. So Fiona Grandowski is partner at Collins Cooper Carusi Architects, a firm that believes physical environments have the power to transform lives. Her passion is collaborating with clients to create enduring spaces and places that enrich the individual's experience and lives. She expands the lens through which we see design in embracing the psychology of the individual, understanding the sociology of how and why we interact, and focusing on the environmental impact of decisions through building. Bringing all these components together, Fiona creates designs that connect us at an individual level, community level, and ecological level. These places include early childhood development centers, schools at all levels, recreation centers, workplaces, and worship spaces. Fiona has focused her last 30 years on shaping spaces where our children, peers, and families spend so much of their time every day. Deborah Lemons is design principal at L2 Studios and has been shaping the narrative of healthcare and hospitality experiences with a special emphasis in resorts, hotels, resort sales galleries, and themed leisure environments for more than 27 years. Deborah establishes and often executes the design direction for many of the firm's projects. She also leads the interior design team and interfaces with clients including Marriott, Hilton, and numerous development and ownership groups. Unfortunately, one of our scheduled panelists, Barbara Dellinger with Adventist Healthcare, was unable to join us last minute due to a medical issue, so we wish her well. But Fiona and Deborah, welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Yeah. Well, I know we've got quite a bit of ground to cover in talking about trends for the future. So let's go ahead and jump right into the conversation. And obviously, as I mentioned, the pandemic dust is already starting to set a little bit, thankfully. And so my first question for you is just sort of what impact it's had on our approach to design of commercial environments. Like, what has changed out of necessity? Like, where are we right now before we look forward to the future?
Yeah,
Cool.
go ahead.
You want to take that?
Sure. So I think that first and foremost, as just about everybody is well aware of, is that we're looking at every environment that we design and that already existed in terms of what it is to keep it clean. There's not necessarily data that says that space has been a communicator of the pandemic. However, cleanliness and maintaining distance has been such a huge thing in controlling the pandemic. So I think that one of the things that we have seen across the board is, what does it look like to put 6 feet between each other in any space, whether we're in the grocery store or whether we're at a restaurant when the restaurants opened in the beginning. When for children in school, classrooms suddenly went from, when they were in person, from being all in rows and really close to each other, to having to figure out how to do more classes to have less students in the classroom. So I think that we've seen so much impacting where we are. And I think, as we've discussed today, we're going to see some of these things will stick, and some of these things we'll be really happy to say sayonara.
Yeah, we talked offline with Stephen about some of the sort of temporary solutions that we've seen to these issues of space, and I think one of the worst examples that we saw, or that he saw, was a shower curtain duct taped to the ceiling from a Subway restaurant or something. I mean, just awful. So I think we will definitely be ready to see some of those temporary things go by the wayside. But Deborah, do you want to weigh in on that question as well?
Yeah, absolutely. With hospitality in the market that we're in, I mean, operations is definitely one of the many hats that we consider when we're designing. Hospitality always puts an emphasis on guest experience and sometimes shock and delight and surprise and, delivering experiences. But I think this past year and a half, operations has come to the forefront. As Fiona said, with cleanability and maintenance and durability in response to the cleanability. What we're also seeing is a more sensitivity to excess. We used to layer and bring in lots of opulent and delightful curated items. And I think we're seeing an approach that is more minimalistic, still very intentional. It's almost similar to the modernist movement of the late 19th century, early 20th century in response to the Spanish flu pandemic, where we're now looking into daylight and open windows and just like a more minimalist approach. So balancing that minimalism and that performance with luxury, comfort, safety, and delight is kind of the new challenge we're overcoming. Spaces that we've had to look at separation and isolation. So now they don't feel warm, or now they don't feel activated. How do we get that back? And how do we achieve that personal space and that flexibility while still feeling active and engaging? So
yeah,
that's where
definitely.
a lot of quick response. So
yeah, definitely. And you touched on a couple different markets there with healthcare and hospitality. Which markets do you think will be impacted the most profoundly by some of these changes, or do you anticipate evolving most significantly in the years ahead? Obviously, healthcare, there's a lot of changes there, but how do you see this impacting specific markets?
I'll go ahead and continue if that's okay. I've actually had the privilege of working in both markets, healthcare and hospitality. When I worked in healthcare, it was a great time during a paradigm shift when it kind of converted over to a patient-centered culture, patient-centered environment, where patient satisfaction mattered, and while clinical settings still had to be rigorously maintained, there was a shift into creating a better experience for patients, for family members, as well as for the clinical staff. I think healthcare has always been ahead of the game with regard to pandemic in terms of sanitization and disinfection and infection control, but now they're having to deal with space issues and separation, and just like the rest of us, you know, how do we deal with our public spaces, our cafeterias, our dining, our circulation, how people come in and out of the space, who comes in and out of the space, etc. Now we're seeing on the hospitality side where healthcare is strongly influencing in reverse the hospitality side. So again, it comes down to performance, durability, disinfection, but also wellness. And we're going to get into other topics of wellness here in a little while. But you know, where hospitality originally was from the residential market, and so we, in the early days, 20 years ago, hospitality didn't have quite the demand for performance, and now we're seeing a lot of crossover in the products. For those of you manufacturers in the audience, I mean, we're demanding, designers are demanding, and end users are demanding quality, beautiful products, luxurious products that have the performance of a healthcare product. So finding that hybrid performance there is really critical for us.
Yeah. Fiona, did you want to add on to
that? You know, I think that healthcare and hospitality, healthcare because it's in the center of the pandemic, is, you know, absolutely where we're going to see so much of an impact, and I think that one's just going to continue. Healthcare has been constantly evolving, to Deborah's point, and hospitality because you guys just hit rock bottom because people were afraid. I mean, literally the hospitality industry did. I think that other industries are going to be, I think that there's not going to be anybody who's untouched. I think that when we talk about food service, there's going to be, it may shift a little bit over time, but people are going to consistently still be inquiring and watching carefully how food service is treating their space and maintaining their space. And oh my gosh, did they just take that dirty rag and clean my table? Which none of us want to see. And then education. I think that the parents are going to be more present and more diligent in terms of asking more of their schools for the safety of their children. You know, we don't yet know what the vaccine looks like for the youngest long term. We're still at the beginning of that. So I think that schools are consistently going to continue to have these questions, especially by all the parents who have lived through this pandemic. And it will take a lot of time. So what happens there will be interesting. Retail. I went into a store the other day that had all of the signs up that said, if you touch it, you put it over here. And I didn't see anybody doing that. So I think that, retail is, I think that things will continue, but I think that some of those precautions will start to disappear. But I really do think just about everywhere that we touch, everywhere we live in this world, corporate, we're going to expect our spaces to be cleaner. And I think that this idea of minimalism, I've noticed it when I've been traveling through the pandemic that, it's not that the spaces were designed to have things removed, but everything's been removed from any room. I miss my coffee. I so miss my coffee in the room. But I think that we're going to see a lot of that across the board. How do we declutter spaces, especially corporate spaces, in order to maintain a different level of cleanliness that you can't necessarily get with a cloth and a spray.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I love that about the minimalism. Yeah, so you are seeing that pretty much everywhere. And as you mentioned, some of these spaces are not being designed to be, you know, all the things being removed, but it is difficult to get people to comply with some of those cleanliness things. But
Right.
I guess it goes to say that, I mean, health and wellness are talking about long-term trends. That's going to be a lasting one from here on out. Am I right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I think
And
so too.
yeah, and I don't know how you feel about this, Deborah, but I think that as a profession, this is part of our role, is to keep health and wellness at the highest level, and to keep it very present in the design world, and to be as vigilant or more vigilant than any of our clients. You know, we have that opportunity to make change and
Right.
to elevate health and wellness in everything that we do. So I'd say that, yeah, we need to be we need to continue what has been instigated through this crisis.
Absolutely. We were seeing a trend in hospitality, especially even before the pandemic, promoting wellness, but it was more of in a soft wellness. You know, it was, oh, better nutrition, or putting a treadmill in the room, or you know, there were gestures that a lot of the brands have been playing with. You know, brands such as Weston or Element or Even, that speak to some of those features or those lifestyle changes in their brands. But I think the pandemic has brought to the front what should have always been there, was the health of the inhabitant. You know, where LEED is more about the health of the planet and sustainability, which, I mean, sustainability and wellness go hand in hand. And as far as the ratings and the certifications for LEED or well building, many of those features overlap each other. But to Fiona's point, I mean, it's really our job to promote the life safety and the wellness of the inhabitants of our buildings. And many times, I mean, because I'm an architect and a designer, I can be schizophrenic and say it, but it's a little bit heresy to say, oh, the building is more than just the sculpture of the building. It's also about protecting the life inside and how we use it and how we really protect that. So yeah. I think it's here to stay, and I'm excited to see that. And I hope that it's a little bit slow to get out of the chute in terms of the true well building aspect with our developers and our owners, but I hope that we'll see more of it here very soon.
Right. Yeah. And with programs like WELL and LEED, I mean, obviously those are voluntary certifications that clients would go after, but do you anticipate like safety, health, wellness finding its way into building code, like as just like a permanent solution, I guess?
I don't mean to keep jumping on Fiona. Yes, I do. I mean, we've seen it happen with LEED. You know, the energy codes have begun, and LEED just keeps raising the bar, which is a good thing. But I think that because so many of those features do overlap, we're going to see, you know, more attention paid to air quality, to daylight, to those things that LEED already did address, and which serves also our energy conservation. But I think the more that we're speaking socially about our health, our mental health, and our physical health, and the burden on the healthcare system, et cetera, you know, there might be some other attributes that start to show up in the building codes too, or the health codes. So,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting. I think I alluded to earlier that there's very little that can actually be traced back to the pandemic being spurred on by space, except for proximity. So although I think that certain aspects of it would be good to be integrated into the code, indoor air quality is huge. And is not really addressed at all by the code. So we may see that eventually. I think energy is much easier for those who are developing codes to get their head around. Quite quite a few engineers,
Yeah.
even the
Yeah.
architects. I'm with you, Deborah. I wear two hats too.
So we get to fight both battles. So
we do. So I will probably hold on that, and I'll wait to see. The thing about well and lead is that we've been doing both of these, incorporating both of these platforms into our buildings long enough now that there's so much in these platforms that you don't need to have the seal on the door. You don't need to pay the money. So much of it is smart design.
absolutely.
And it doesn't cost more money. And, the more that we can do smart design across the board, and I love the fact that it exists for those who want to elevate it even higher. But for, if we have a client who says that they're not interested in well, they are interested in well. They just, because they still want a healthy environment for their occupants. So it's still our job to understand what these programs are doing and what they're proposing to help improve, because a lot of we can still do.
Yes, there's a bit of that client education in the mix as well, sounds like.
Absolutely.
So technology is another topic, obviously, that will continue to shape the design spaces for the foreseeable future. In what ways do you see technology, either software that's used in conceptual design or technology that's integrated into buildings, with IoT devices or 5G? How do you see that changing the landscape of the built environment and how we design for it?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So, it's interesting. This question is sort of twofold, because there's a huge impact with technology on what we do every day to develop these buildings. And we've all seen a massive impact in the way that we work when we've all been dispersed and virtual, that the technology and the software has been imperative. And a lot of that's not going to go away. We're going to, our office would like to be in person as quickly, everybody in person, not just some of us, as soon as possible. But we know that virtual is still going to be a part of what we do. And so now the next layer of this is, what does it look like to be virtual and in person? Right now it's a train wreck. You've got a bunch of people who are meeting in person with a couple who are joining virtually, and being able to hear everybody appropriately without what most of us know as a high-end corporate conference room with microphones for everybody and so forth. That's not everyday design. And so how do we get to that next level so that virtual and in person can happily cohabitate and be more seamless? And so I think that's going to be one of the challenges for the future. But yeah, technology is here to stay. And the design profession is not the only area that is looking at what this looks like, virtual plus in person. And I think that's the next challenge for technology.
I agree.
Yeah. Deborah, what do you think?
I absolutely agree. It's here to stay from our market, specifically in hospitality, but I think it covers all markets. It's just a sensitivity to how we seamlessly and perhaps invisibly integrate technology. It's available, the infrastructure is there, but technology is not the aesthetic. And so it's not an add-on, it's not a shoehorn in, it's beautifully integrated. I think Fiona's absolutely right about the where and the how, and that it's always available. We're seeing an immediate need for hybrid spaces and how those spaces can be personalized and accessed easily via virtual or live technology. We're seeing the development of even outdoor spaces, and I think that covers education as well. Fiona, too, you're probably seeing that, where we can amenitize and put the infrastructure in for outdoor space to make comfortable and functional meeting spaces, education spaces, gathering spaces that aren't obviously portable. They're well integrated and well designed. So that's a new thing in our market. I hope it's here to stay because we all love our fresh air, and in most climates anyway, most seasons. And then I will probably take a different take on this, that we're going to also see a reaction to technology. We're going to see spaces that, or clients or customers that desire places and spaces of engagement that are unplugged. And so we need to detox from the technology. We need to, have that balance of, we do it 90% of our day, but now where do I go and what does that look like to be unplugged and to be genuinely unplugged? So just another take on that too.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you bring up education. I think that one of the other aspects that technology has really brought to the forefront in a different way during COVID is this accessibility that we wouldn't have really had. Even this platform today, a year and a half ago, it might have happened occasionally, but you were usually waiting or trying to get to a place where you could see people in person to speak about different topics. But I think that, I've got more continuing education over the last year and a half than just because a lot of it was really interesting that I wouldn't have been able to do before. But when you think about education, the access that this is given to all levels of students, regardless of whether they're in a private school, they're in a public school, they come from a wealthy neighborhood, they come from a poor neighborhood, it's actually giving a little bit of an opportunity to level out the opportunities for connectivity to sources that they wouldn't have had. It's also uncovered a huge level of inequity in terms of connectivity. So that takes it really out of buildings and into society. But as schools come back and students come back into schools, holding on to this elevated level of access to expertise and to sources that the students wouldn't have ever had before, to figuring out how to find more equity across the board for education. I think it's going to be it's a big question, and it's something that a lot of neighborhoods struggled with throughout the pandemic, of getting more bandwidth so that the students weren't being disconnected, so that they weren't being put at a disadvantage because of their disadvantaged situations. And that's, it's a much bigger topic, but I think a lot of schools are really taking it head on.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It actually relates to a comment that we already got from someone in the audience. So I'll go ahead and post that now since we're talking about it. But somebody asked if you can touch on inclusive design, creating spaces that are accessible to all, specifically like gender neutral restrooms. Can you touch on that a little bit?
What are you doing on gender neutral, Deborah?
I would love to touch on that. So I am, during the pandemic, one of the Network of Executive Women in Hospitality, or NEWH, one of our major organizations in our industry, promoted a design competition, really just to get this conversation started on what is the pandemic effect on the guest room, the public space, the restrooms, the restaurants, etc. And our team took a little different approach in the guest restroom, the public restroom, and that, this wasn't just a pandemic. There were lots of undercurrents going on in the past year, socially, politically, everything. And that, yes, we could, through the disinfection technologies of light and air and et cetera, and cleanable surfaces. I mean, that was the low-hanging fruit that we were all talking about. But if we really took it to a more social level and cultural level, we said there's more going on than just disinfection. So we actually developed several studies for the all-gender restroom. It's not even fair to say gender neutral, because that neutralizes the person who is identifying a particular way. So there's a vocabulary, there's a language with which we speak culturally about these groups and their relevance. And even if you put it into practical ways of a father taking his daughter to the restroom, he's out for the day with his daughter. It doesn't, it's so much deeper in addition to the social aspects of it. So we did develop a concept or a prototype, if you will, for an all gender restroom. And it takes exactly the same square footage or footprint, same fixture count of a men's and a women's segregated restrooms. And I think solved it quite beautifully. We actually were published in the magazine that was promoting it. And, we've continued to try to talk about it. We know that the IBC is adopting that in the plumbing code, the all gender, non-segregated restrooms. And there's language in a lot of plumbing codes. And certainly it's been in the European markets longer than here. We're a little late to catch up in the West or in America, but I think it's relevant, it's coming, it needs to be considered, and there are a lot of great operational reasons for doing it as well, not just the political or the social reasons. There's some great operations aspects, and if anyone wants to take that offline, I'd be happy to talk further about that. But I'm a huge advocate from a design, from a planning, from an experiential, from an operational standpoint.
Yeah. We're working with a Unitarian congregation right now here in Atlanta, and although they call it gender neutral, it was one of their initiatives from day one, and for them, it is about equity and justice. And so it's been a really interesting journey with them, and I'm super excited that the plumbing code is catching up, because we've just been going through the rigmarole of what does it look like to take it through permitting, and the code officials cannot and are not willing to at this point in time. To step outside the norm. However, they're giving us other ways to balance it, at least for their review. So, I am looking forward to it. We've had this come up with high schools. We've had it come up in areas where it actually took me aback a little bit. I was surprised to hear an urban high school ask me about how we can have restrooms that are equal for all, and what that might look like. And so I think that you're right, Deborah. This is the story. We're behind, but it's not going away. And I think I saw that competition being published, and so I applaud them for stepping up and putting it out there, because I think this is a topic for a bigger conversation, because it is wrapped up in everything that's happening right now. We didn't just have a pandemic. We had, this has been a shift almost across the spectrum for what it looks like to live in this world.
Right. Yeah, there was another question that came in, I think is related to, a conversation around equity. So someone asked, has the pandemic accelerated the need for behavioral health design?
We were just talking about that earlier, Deborah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, again, behavioral health has always been a label, and it's a specialty within healthcare, but I think it is now all encompassing. And the fact that we're more willing to talk about it, we're willing to talk about mental health, and provide spaces, provide a design point of view, or deliver a design point of view that is sensitive to different needs. Travelers, that are stressed out are different, from business travel. or maybe they had a bad day or didn't close a sale or whatever. I mean, you know, what does the hospitality and the restaurant environment provide them? What does the educational environment, and I won't get on Fiona's turf, but you know, I think it is right in front of us now. And so how we as designers are more sensitive to that and providing space and place, even whether it's the quality of light, whether it's how we define space, where we provide place of respite, indoors, outdoors. You know, how does a guest room make you feel safe and comforted, not just a place to drop your dirty luggage, you know? So it's absolutely in the forefront. It's not limited to healthcare. So.
Yeah. Fiona, you want to touch on that as well, or?
Well, I think that one of the aspects of this is going to continue to develop over time. I think that the impacts of this pandemic are still unknown. And so I always go back to education. You know, I worry about what we don't know about what the children of this pandemic have actually gone through during the pandemic, whether it's isolation, whether it's that they were in a home that is not a happy home, and the school was the one place where they're safe, and so through the pandemic they haven't been as safe, or whether it's that, you know, they excelled in a virtual environment, but they're going to go back to an in-person environment and find it difficult again. So I think that mental health is going to be huge across the entire education spectrum, but specifically K through 12. I think that the younger kids, but until we've gone through at least 1 year, I think that the total impact is still going to be somewhat invisible, and it may be much, much longer that it's invisible, that we don't see the impact until much later. So, but I do think that bringing to the forefront all of the different people, when you broaden it in terms of mental health and physical disabilities, I think that this idea of equity is sort of blowing up in terms of, we're working on a couple of different retreats that are focused on very specific types of disabilities, where these kids can find a safe place to both grow, connect, and learn how to work within their disabilities or their physical parameters. So I mean, it's very exciting as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And universal design too, I think, has, you know, besides this notion of equity coming up, we're not just accommodating the disabled, we are now giving them an equal experience. And you know, part of the interpretation of the guideline is starting to promote that even stronger. But as designers, I think, you know, we have the privilege of designing that way, you know, to think about how an accessible restroom or an accessible guest room or an accessible route into a building should not be a second-class experience. You shouldn't have to say, oh, I got the last room in the hotel and it's the ADA room. You know, they should be so beautifully integrated. And as I think Fiona said earlier, it doesn't have to cost more. It's just thoughtful. And I'm again, that's a huge believer, or we're a huge believer on our team about the universal design and the equity in that, as well as, you know, just everyone deserves the quality experience. I will point out too, just one thing that's crossing over with us, Fiona, is the world of the office environment, the workplace. We don't do as much of that in our market, but we do deal with the employee experience in the back of the house. And I would love to open this up to you a little bit about how our clients are resistant, because it's a real estate proposition, to take on this idea of the serenity room. You know, there is a requirement for lactation, there, you know, 50 plus employees, et cetera, there's a formula, but whether you're 50 employees or less or more, this notion of a sacred spot to get away, whether it's for lactation, whether it's for prayer, whether it is for a migraine or just 15 minutes of mental health, you know, we're just seeing a lot of resistance to incorporating that space or those spaces. I hope that changes with this. Fiona, I'd love to hear from you on that.
I think that it is changing, but you're right, the smaller offices, although I know that we have ours. I love the name Serenity Room. I'm gonna steal that one, Deborah.
You can have it.
So we are seeing it, but I think that your approach to this sort of crossover of it being not just a mother's room, which I think is part of the issue for a lot of clients, is that they do see it as real estate, but the mental health of their employees is gaining strength. And I think that when you start to talk about it in that respect, it becomes not just more palatable, but more desirable to them. But I think they're still going, how do we manage that? What do we do with it?
How do we
so there's a lot
schedule
of questions. There's a lot of questions that go with it. In higher ed, it's not a question anymore when we do higher ed. There are mother's rooms, lactation rooms, any number of names of rooms. I'm going to call them Serenity Rooms now. They are appearing sort of across the board, because the student today is not the student of 15 to 20 years ago. And we can't expect to continue to design the same spaces. And I think that, we're seeing that across the board in every type of space, but definitely in education. The shift of who the student is has transitioned greatly, from the very young to the second, the third careers. It's not uncommon for people to come back to education, and higher education is looking to have that happen. The number of careers that will be careers that we don't even know what they are in the future is going to grow exponentially. And so higher ed is looking to say, how can we be a continued resource for our students from the first time they come onto campus throughout their entire lives? And schools like Georgia Tech are definitely leading the way, and at least talking about this idea and what does it mean for them for the future. So I think it's all very, it's fascinating, and I love what I do.
That's wonderful insights there, and also to our audience, those are great questions. And if you want to continue to submit those, I have a couple more, and then we'll take some live Q&A as well. But so what other long-term trends do you both see emerging as we look forward, let's say the next 5, 10 years and beyond? If you look into your crystal ball, if you will, what do you think we can expect?
Well, I have my list here, and we've already talked about 2 of them, so I'm not going to have much to say. I was going to say the all gender facilities and mental health spaces and experiences that promote mental health. I'm intrigued too by, and again, I'm speaking to who I'm assuming half of our audience is in terms of manufacturers of products. Things that we did learn in this past year about hygiene, and kind of reminded us that, we didn't really have that many colds and much flu and other things, because we were so hygienic, we were so clean this year. And so how do we get back to the ritual of hygiene? Maybe, right now the touchless fixtures are not that exciting. They're not really beautiful. So how do we get back to where we celebrate hygiene and we design spaces, whether it's these beautiful all gender restrooms, or whether it's, the guest room in a hotel, or whatever, that the sacred vessel or the sacred faucet, that there's just this beautiful spiritual aspect of hygiene. So I'm intrigued by that. I don't know that that'll have any take on any mileage, but I'm intrigued by the notion of that it's not just functional, it could be spiritual as well. Universal design, of course, we just covered, because I think socially it's expected, and for equitable space. And then culturally, I guess from our market, we've gone back and forth between prototyping and these cookie cutter efficient development standards by all of the major brands. But I think we're craving experiences. We're ready to travel again. And for those of us that can't travel or won't travel soon, I think at least internationally, the experiences we're looking for are diverse. We want, diversity or experiences that reflect the diversity of our culture. So more color, more artisanal quality, more craft that speaks to the local region, the local neighborhood, a local group within that neighborhood. How do we tell their story and create destinations that cross the cultural lines, and then have artifacts and crafts within the spaces that reflect those lines? Now, how do we do that and still be cleanable and mass produced and efficient and cost effective? I don't know. That's up to you guys. But I just think we're craving more than the prototype. So.
Yeah. Fiona, what are your thoughts on what's coming down the road here on the horizon?
Well, I do think that going back to something that's definitely not necessarily within our realm, but the expansion of technology and the continued evolution of technology and what that looks like. But the way in which we do bring it into space, to Deborah's point earlier about it not being in your face, so that, and I think that even in places where it's all about technology, how can we reduce that technology overload in the space, so that in some ways, you've seen it in corporate for quite a while, that technology can disappear. But how can we do that in spaces where students are looking at screens all day long, but how can that space transform into being a space that isn't driven by technology? It's a really fantastic idea for us to have spaces that you can retreat to, but sometimes you don't have the budget for another space. So how can we think about designing that space, or have the tools to design that space so that it can transform itself? And so I think that that's one of the things that I think we're going to continue to see in education, is how do we do more with less? I think that it's difficult for public schools to really increase their classroom sizes for more flexible classrooms. When they do that, they are pulling away from other spaces that the footprints are not really growing. So how do we really find flexibility in those spaces that's greater than just moving furniture around, and look at these spaces so that we can do this without spending a whole lot more money? And that is the challenge that we will have as designers, I believe. So yeah, and I'd love to see more walls that can disappear and don't cost a small fortune. We really would.
Good point. All right. Well, as we kind of wind down our conversation here, I have one more question, and we might have time for one or two more. But so, are there current maybe trends that may not live that long, you think are going to go by the wayside, or you hope go by the wayside?
I think that we've probably seen a lot of things that we would like to see go by the wayside.
Absolutely.
We would like the screens. We were talking about that earlier. We would like to see those screens go away. I think that it was Robert who mentioned that, we've got this screen, we've got this little tiny hole so that you can speak or pass things through. And what does everybody do? They're leaning down to the hole and yelling through the hole. And then that idea of separating the germs, you've just spoken all of the germs through the hole to the other side. And so some things that have occurred don't make any sense. And so this idea of really thinking differently about how we interact with each other versus forcing these separations between people. And so, yeah, I'd really like to see the plastic barriers go away.
I totally agree. Deborah, what about you?
Definitely.
And
Yeah. Or you have another?
Well,
oh,
yeah, go ahead,
the
Tiana.
6 feet between people, I really, I'm ready to hug people.
Yes.
I'm a hugger. Yeah, we're Southern. We're huggers here. So, yeah.
I'm with you.
I agree on that. And I guess our challenge as we've explored this in the last year is how do we define space and define paths and define elective separation without tape on the floor and decals and markers and screens and all of that? Can we use architecture and use design to define literally or kind of figuratively in the space to give people cues without blatantly being stickers on the floor and barriers. And I think we all have a new sense of personal space, except maybe me because I'm a huge hugger, but a new sense of personal space that we didn't have before, and being aware of that in the scale of furniture design. Is it higher backs that create rooms within rooms, and now I can choose to sit there if I want to feel a little more separation, but I don't have to limit the number of groupings I have in the room now. Maybe there's just ways we can use the toolbox that we have a little differently. I think we're long gone now with fever clinics and isolation rooms and things, except for healthcare. But we've got to think flexibly maybe in our building planning, schools as well as hotels, that in the event there was another one of these, how do we shut down a wing? How do we isolate a group of rooms? How do we bring ingress and egress of those infected people and clinical staff or anything else to assist? I don't know that it's going to drive the design, but it's something new we have in mind, because real estate's still a premium. We have to use every inch that we have in the building, but now we can change our building planning a little bit to consider this in the future. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We might find that what always felt like a duplicate circulation path now has meaning.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Well, we've always had an on-stage, off-stage in our market, and I think healthcare does, and prisons do, and probably schools too. I don't know. But now there's a whole different meaning to off-stage or backstage. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we had one question come in from the audience. Says, we talked about LEED and WELL. Are many of your clients going for certification or just building towards the standard without wanting the certification? What are you seeing in different markets with your clients?
Fiona?
We have both.
Oh.
We have both. We have we still have clients who pursue LEED on a regular basis. We have for WELL, most of our clients have pursued WELL until it gets to the point that it really is in their court and they need to change how they do certain things. And that's when, especially at a university level, it might become a little bit more political. So we've taken WELL all the way to the line to have the client. So we've done everything we could for the building, and then it comes back to the client. But we're so everything that we do for the clients that pursue LEED, we're maintaining doing all of the things that don't cost our clients any more money with our clients that don't pursue LEED. And some of them are looking to go that higher level, but not pay the price tag. And they're doing it, for the right reasons, not just to have a plaque on the door. So we definitely give our clients the space to make their own decisions on that front, with them knowing full well that we have the expertise to take them either way.
Right. What are you seeing, Deborah? Or is it similar?
I'm pretty similar to Fiona's experience in that the clients don't really they might have a desire to change or to make these changes. They might, but it's such an overwhelming prospect to redefine their entire management structure and operational structure to adopt some of the practices that happen after design in order to maintain the certification. What I think we're trying to do most is just educate them on a way that they can position themselves in the marketplace, whether it's with the plaque on the door or not, but just say, hey, if you, besides the fact it's the right thing to do, it's for the health and the safety of your not only your guests or your customers, but also your employees and your employee retention and attraction. This has become a more hot topic with new employees coming in. So we try to at least educate them on what's available to them and how, with very minor changes to what we already do, they can have this certification. But it is slow to come out. I think Lowe's Hotels is the only one so far, at least within 3 months ago when I was learning about this. They've gone for the health safety rating, the WELL health safety rating for all of their properties. I have not heard of any of the other brands really adopting it yet, but I'm hopeful that at least, again, with or without the plaque, I'm hopeful that we see a little more evolution in how we design spaces and systems to accommodate it.
All right, great. Well, I don't see any further questions, and we're kind of wrapping up our time. So Fiona and Deborah, thank you so much, both again, for sharing your insights with us. It's been great chatting with you.
Thank you. Thank you both. Nice speaking with you, Fiona.
Thank you, Robert.
Bye, Robert. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to turn things back over to Stephen, who will transition us to our one-to-one meetings at this time. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Fiona and Deborah. Wonderful. Now is the time, as Robert said, that we will move to